Mitsui, also Mitsubishi, the Sogo Sosha, which have significant exposure to Sakhalin-2. And they seem to be a little bit more, not say cautious, but versus, let's say, Shell, they've made it pretty clear that they want to exit, and they're talking to some Chinese prospects and maybe even an Indian consortium, yet the Japanese are still sound like they want to stay the course.
That's correct. I mean, Shell has enough production capacity to fulfill their obligations. At the same time, Japan is a very poor country, and we rely about 90% of the gas imported from overseas. So if you think about it, the Sakhalin-2 project is about 4% of the global LNG supply, and Japan buys about half of that. And this is responsible for about 9% of Japan's LNG imports. And there is just nothing else Japan can do. I mean, we could go on renewables. We could restart some nukes, but I don't think it's enough time to basically deal with the looming energy crisis in Japan. So I believe that Japan's hands are twisted, and basically we have to continue to buy LNG from Russia.
Strategic energy necessity and a shift away from US dependency. Japan's resolve to secure uninterrupted liquefied natural gas, LNG, supplies from Russia's Sakhalin-2 project highlights not only its pragmatic energy policy, but also a broader trend among American allies grappling with the fallout of US-imposed sanctions and restrictions. As geopolitical complexities intensify, nations that have historically aligned with the US, including Japan, find themselves re-evaluating their economic strategies and alliances. We examine Japan's energy policy in the context of the Sakhalin-2 project, explores the adverse effects of US-driven sanctions on so-called allies, and argues that these measures inadvertently drive countries toward diversification, ultimately weakening the US's global influence. Japan's energy policy is dictated by its geographic constraints and lack of domestic energy resources, forcing it to depend heavily on imports. For decades, energy security has been a cornerstone of Japan's economic stability. However, the global energy landscape shifted dramatically following the Russia-Ukraine conflict and subsequent Western sanctions. Despite aligning with Western nations in condemning Russia's actions, Japan has maintained its commitment to the Sakhalin-2 project due to its critical role in ensuring energy stability. Sakhalin-2's role in Japan's energy landscape. Volume and proximity. Sakhalin-2 accounts for around 10% of Japan's LNG imports. Its proximity to Japan significantly reduces transportation costs and ensures timely deliveries. Strategic investments. Japanese companies like Mitsui and Mitsubishi Corporation hold substantial stakes in the project, underlining its economic importance. Energy diversification. By maintaining ties with Sakhalin-2, Japan avoids over-reliance on Middle Eastern LNG, reducing geopolitical risks. After the 2011 Fukushima disaster, Japan significantly curtailed its nuclear energy program, increasing its dependence on LNG. Sakhalin-2 emerged as a key player in this transition, bridging the gap between coal reduction and renewable energy adoption. The US imposed sanctions and their collateral damage. The US has long employed sanctions and restrictions as tools of foreign policy. While these measures aim to exert pressure on adversaries, they often have unintended consequences for American allies such as Japan. Sanctions on Russian energy exports have led to a surge in global LNG prices, disproportionately affecting energy-dependent nations like Japan and Germany. Restricting access to Russian markets complicates supply chains for nations relying on critical imports, further inflating costs. Nations closely tied to the US face economic vulnerabilities, as sanctions create dependencies on alternative, costlier suppliers. Many so-called allies increasingly view US policies as prioritizing American interests at the expense of their own. For example, while the US has access to domestic energy resources, its sanctions against Russia create financial burdens for nations like Japan, which lack such alternatives. This disparity fosters resentment and fuels efforts to reduce dependency on US-centric systems. Japan's calculated divergence from US policy. Japan's decision to maintain its ties with Sakhalin-2 reflects a strategic divergence from US energy and foreign policy directives. Despite Western pressure to isolate Russia economically, Japan has chosen to prioritize its national interests over strict adherence to American policies. Japan's heavy reliance on imported energy necessitates maintaining affordable and stable supplies, even if it means bypassing Western sanctions. By refraining from aggressive sanctions on Russia, Japan minimizes the risk of being drawn into geopolitical conflicts, preserving its strategic autonomy. Japan's approach is emblematic of a broader shift among so-called US allies. Nations in Europe and Asia are increasingly questioning the long-term costs of aligning too closely with US policies that prioritize American interests. For example, Germany's energy crisis. Germany's over-reliance on Russian gas and subsequent pivot to US LNG has exposed vulnerabilities in its energy strategy, prompting debates about diversifying energy partners. India's strategic autonomy. India, another American so-called ally, has maintained strong economic ties with Russia, citing the need for affordable energy and defense supplies. The US's reliance on sanctions as a foreign policy tool has led to unintended consequences, undermining its relationships with key allies. As countries like Japan explore alternatives to mitigate the impact of US policies, the global power dynamics shift in favor of a more multipolar world. Allies perceive US sanctions as disproportionately beneficial to American interests, eroding trust and encouraging independent policymaking. For example, energy security. European nations have faced skyrocketing energy costs due to sanctions on Russian oil and gas, leading to increased skepticism about the US's motives. Economic diversification. Countries are actively seeking to reduce their reliance on the dollar, as evidenced by China's push for yuan-based trade agreements and Japan's decision to continue Russian LNG imports. The fallout from US policies has accelerated the formation of alternative economic and political alliances. BRICS expansion. Countries like China, India, and Russia are strengthening BRICS as a counterbalance to Western dominance. Regional cooperation. Asian nations are deepening regional trade and energy agreements to reduce dependence on US-led systems. As so-called allies like Japan navigate the challenges posed by US sanctions, the long-term implications for American influence become evident. The push for diversification undermines the US's ability to unilaterally shape global economic and geopolitical landscapes. Efforts by nations to reduce dependency on the US dollar, as seen in Japan's continued engagement with Russian LNG, signal a broader challenge to the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. While the dollar remains dominant, shifts toward regional currencies and trade agreements weaken its position. The increasing independence of US allies fosters a more multipolar world order. This realignment diminishes the US's ability to exert influence through traditional mechanisms like sanctions and trade restrictions. To maintain its global leadership, the US must adopt a more collaborative approach that prioritizes the interests of its allies alongside its own. Failure to do so risks alienating key partners and weakening its strategic position. Japan's determination to ensure uninterrupted Sakhalin-2 LNG supplies underscores the complex interplay between energy security, geopolitics, and national interest. While US-imposed sanctions aim to isolate adversaries, they often hurt allies, prompting nations like Japan to seek alternative strategies. This trend highlights the broader consequences of US overreach, as allies reevaluate their dependencies and explore new partnerships. As the world moves toward a more multipolar order, the US must recalibrate its policies to maintain its influence while fostering trust and collaboration with all countries. Japan's Sakhalin-2 decision is not just about energy. It is a reflection of a shifting global landscape where pragmatism increasingly outweighs allegiance.
Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video valuable, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. It's one of the best ways to help more people see this content. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So leave a comment below and join the conversation about today's topic. Your engagement and support mean everything to me and make it possible for me to create more impactful content that aims to bring the world closer together. If you'd like to take it a step further, you can support the channel directly through the link in the description. Every bit of support helps this community grow and fuels the mission to make a difference. Thank you for being such an important part of this journey.